Now we will go over al-Ikrah. We're still talking about أسباب التخفيف. أسباب التخفيف, causes of alleviation. Alleviation of what? The burden of taklif, the burden of legal accountability from the mukallaf, to alleviate the burden of taklif from the mukallaf for certain causes. And we said, how many causes do we have? 10. And 10 is just like a nice number. But you could actually say 9, you could say 11, 12. It depends on how you classify things. But 10 is a nice number. So what are those 10? They belong to groups. Where are we to begin with? We were talking about al-Qawaaid al-Fiqhiyya, right? al-Qawaaid al-Fiqhiyya. Legal maxims. And we said that we will cover 4 sections. The first one was introductions, right? And the second one is the major comprehensive legal maxims. And the third one is the minor legal maxims. And the fourth one is the controller, regulators, the orbit, the very narrow scope maxims, which regulate like a few issues within one chapter or something. So these are called al-Dawabit, controllers, regulators. We're done with introduction. We're now here in the major ones. And we said there are 5 of them. We're done with al-Umur bi-maqasidiha. These are judged by their intentions. We're done with al-Yaqin la yazul bil-shak. Certainty is not overruled by doubt. We're done with, la darar wa la dirar, or darar yuzal. Harm is to be removed. So we are done with 1, 2, and 3. And we're now talking about al-mashaqqa tajlib al-taysir. Hardship begets facility. And hardship begets facility. What we usually do is we address the definition and then we go over some guidelines. And we started the guidelines. We started to talk about the guidelines for this particular maxim, al-mashaqqa tajlib al-taysir, or hardship begets facility. And the guideline that we're addressing now, it just happened to be, basically vast, is أسباب التخفيف. أسباب التخفيف, causes of alleviation. Cause of alleviation. When we talk about alleviation, what are the causes of alleviation? And we said that basically causes of alleviation and أسباب التخفيف. And we said that we can basically put them into groups. There are causes that are related to the, to the mukallaf, to the taklif itself, to the environment around us. The mukallaf, the taklif itself, and the environment around us. So the taklif itself, meaning the order, the command, the demand of the Sharia, sometimes there is al-usr wa umum al-balwa. Al-usr wa umum al-balwa, which is called difficulty and widespread affliction. Difficulty and widespread affliction. Basically, tin al-shawara, the najasat in tin al-shawara. If you have to be very careful about the mud in the street and whether, this is clean or not, and your clothes and, street mud and stuff like this, and impurities in the street, because their streets were different from ours. Their streets, the cows would go through, and dogs and their streets were basically for all sorts of creatures. So this is called al-usr wa umum al-balwa, widespread affliction. This pertains to the taklif itself, to the matter at hand. What about the mukallaf? The mukallaf, al-usr wa umum al-balwa. Okay, what about the mukallaf? The mukallaf goes through different conditions. Mukallaf himself goes through different conditions. First of all, there is deficiency. The Mukallaf has a permanent deficiency, where this is not an incidental factor. This is just like permanent, like insanity, not permanent in the sense of completely permanent, but in the sense of ongoing, like minority, like insanity, like slavery. These are three matters that are called deficiency. Naqs fi legal accountability. It's deficiency of legal accountability. And then the Mukallaf may have one of the conditions from which no human being is free. خطأ, النسيان, الجهل, الإكراه. But we put al-khata' wal-nisyan together, which is error, khata' error, and nisyan forgetfulness. We put al-khata' wal-nisyan together as one cause, and then al-jahl, which is ignorance, we put it as another cause, and then al-ikrah is what we will talk about now. Al-mukallaf also, there could be some other circumstances, like al-ittirar, like al-mukallaf is in the middle of nowhere and there is no food, so this is called al-ittirar, necessity. That's another condition that you could say pertains to the mukallaf or to the environment around them. And then in mukallaf, so there may have al-marad, which is disease. And then you have travel. And then you have something that is not necessarily peculiar to the Hanbali madhab, but we actually are more observant of it than the other madhahib, which is what? The one that surprised you. At-targhib fil Islam, motivating people to convert. So at-targhib fil Islam is a cause of alleviation, to motivate people to convert to Islam. We do consider this. We, in the Hanbali madhab, unlike the other madhahib, we accept al-Islam ala shart al-fasid. We accept al-Islam with a corrupt condition. If someone makes a condition that they will only pray 2 salawat when they convert, the 3 other madhahib will say, no, we will not take that Islam until you conform completely. Imam Ahmad reported from the Prophet ﷺ, he accepted such conditions not in the sense of dropping the obligation, in the sense of they will come around. In the sense of they will come around. And they did come around. And he said it, the Prophet ﷺ, سَيَتَصَدَّقُونَ وَيُجَاهِدُونَ. They will give charity and they will make jihad. They will give charity and they will make jihad. Once Islam settles in their hearts, once they taste the sweetness of faith, they will come around. Okay, so now this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Are we missing one? العسر وعموم البلوى? Okay. Huh? Al-waswasa, thank you so much. OCD, waswasa, obsessiveness. So, sometimes it would be next to al-waswasa, next to marad. People who are obsessive, they get sort of certain concessions and dispensations to help them with their condition, obsessiveness. So these are the 10 causes. Which one will we talk about today? Al-ikrah, that is coercion. And this is an important one. This is an important one that we talk about today. And it is important for 2 big reasons. 2 big reasons. Number 1, you will see that Islam recognizes human vulnerability, which is important. Human beings are weak. وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضعيفة. Man was created weak. We're very weak creatures, you know, very weak creatures. Anyone who thinks otherwise, they are completely deluded. Just a little virus can, like, you know, the biggest wrestler, the strongest wrestler in the world, you know, just a little virus can devastate them. So we're very weak creatures. خلق الإنسان ضعيفا. So Islam recognizes human vulnerability, but at the same time refuses to allow for total and blind subservience to unjust power. Total and blind subservience to unjust power. So we will see today how we balance between the two. You know, recognizing human vulnerability and allowing room for the coerced, basically, to avoid harm, and at the same time, you know, refusing to lift accountability altogether from the coerced. And we'll see how Islam does this. The other thing that is important also is that when you study al-Iqra and when you study the guardrails, the boundaries that we cannot cross, you will recognize something important that pertains to the discussion of ethics. Do you know the modern discussions on ethics? You know, usually the modern discussions on ethics are discussed within the scope of whether ethics should be utilitarian or categorical. So you have the categorical, the Kantian type ethics, and you have the utilitarian. This is the Benthamite, and then the qualitative utilitarian, John Stewart, and all of that. But categorical imperative, which is called CI, categorical imperative, this is also called the deontological. Deontological. And this is called teleological. And what is the difference between this? This side is obligation-based. This side is outcome-based. Outcome-based. This is about al-wajib. What is al-wajib alayk? Wajib la takzib. Wajib is to not lie. But what if saying the truth will cause like a really bad outcome? You know, then you will have this. What do we call this in our discourse? Al-ma'alat. Outcome. Al-ma'alat. Outcomes. Al-ma'alat. What is going to transpire from saying the truth or lying? Should you consider this or not? And so what is Islam? Deontological or teleological? You know, obligation-based, outcome-based, categorical or utilitarian? We will see that Islam is, and all of this discussion is basically floating in the air without anchorage. You know, floating in the air without anchorage. Elizabeth Anscombe wrote an article about this, and she argued that all of this is meaningless. All of the discussion about moral philosophy is meaningless without anchorage. At the end of the day, why? Why should I be moral to begin with? If it is not based, you know, certainly she was for virtue ethics, but she was also a practicing Catholic, and people have all kinds of speculations about what she meant. But from our perspective, if this is not anchored in the moral lawgiver, if there is no anchorage, if this is not all anchored to the moral lawgiver, which is God, then it is just floating in thin air and meaningless, because why should I be moral to begin with? And then, so Islam, well, you cannot basically place Islam on a particular point on the spectrum between teleological and categorical. Islam combines and balances and harmonizes between them and anchors everything to the source of this morality, of moral objectivity, the moral lawgiver. So it is basically based on the divine lawgiver. It is based on obedience. It is anchored in obedience to the divine, but it accommodates features from both groups and adds a capstone of virtue ethics. These are the Nicomachean Aristotelian ethics, virtue ethics. قد أفلح من زكاها. He's prosperous, he who purifies it, purifies his soul. This is basically virtue ethics, virtue ethics. This is the capstone that Islam adds to all of this. But Islam does have utilitarian features, right? Yeah. The Prophet allowed, the Prophet said, al-harb khuda, so allowed deception, not treachery, allowed some degree of deception in war, but not treachery, not when you violate your agreements or things of that nature. He didn't allow that. He forbade that. But he allowed some degree of, the Prophet allowed basically saying other than the truth to, for particular reasons. That innocent person that is being chased, you misguide them to not find him, and to rectify between people, and to basically bring about warmth in relationships between spouses, for instance, and in war and things of that nature. So are these utilitarian features? Yes, they are utilitarian features. So now the question arises, and there are many other examples. There are many other examples. So when Aisha says when the Prophet when someone came and the Prophet said, "Bi's akhul ashira," what a bad, tribesman he is. And then he came in and he spoke to him very kindly and very warmly. And Aisha said to him, "You said what you said and you did what you did." And the Prophet ﷺ said to her, "The worst of people are those who are avoided, to avoid their evil, or or something, or كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم." So the idea here is another than ma'alat. To look at outcomes is certainly considered in Islam. To look at outcomes is certainly considered in Islam. But the question arises, do we have guardrails? What prevents us from being Machiavellian? Although, as I told you before, Machiavelli himself may not be that Machiavellian. It is something that people ascribe to him afterwards, or, blew out of proportion. But Machiavelli himself may have not been that Machiavellian. But what keeps us from going all the way Machiavellian? We will go. This discussion is pertinent to that question. We will know that Islam provides guardrails that are not to be crossed. Here we go. So, Sheikh Sa'di rahimahullah said in his poetic composition, والخطأ الإكراه والنسيان أسقطه معبود الرحمن وينتفي التأثيم عنه والزلل لكن مع الإتلاف يثبت البدل. We went over this before. Error, coercion, and forgetfulness. The merciful Lord has lifted them from us, but in cases of destruction, compensation remains while sin and blame are lifted. Compensation remains while sin and blame are lifted. This is, remember from the first discussion, not last time when we talked about jahl or ignorance, when we talked about khata and nisyan, error and forgetfulness, the 1 week before, we said there is a difference between khitab al-wada and khitab al-taklif. There is a difference between the declarative and the imperative instruction of God. Sometimes things are just linked to their causes without accountability being considered here. Some things are just linked to their causes. You destroy someone's property, whether you're ignorant, whether you're forgetful, whether you're coerced, you destroy someone's property, they will ask you for compensation, you will be liable for compensation. We will see that the coerced eventually, according to the madhab, will go back and demand that compensation from the coercer. But he will be liable in front of the property owner for compensation. And then, in turn, he will go back and demand that compensation from the coercer. But people's rights are not just dropped, because khitab al-wada' is contingent on what? Insaniyya. Simply being human. You know, khitab al-wada' will apply to you. Khitab al-taklif is contingent on aql, reason. If you don't have aql, then, you know, khitab al-taklif doesn't apply to you. But khitab al-wada' is contingent on insaniyya. Ibn al-Laham, rahimahullah, let's talk about the types of coercion now. Let's talk about the types of coercion now. So Ibn al-Laham, rahimahullah, in his 6 Maxim says, one who is coerced and physically forced like an instrument is not held legally accountable. Imposing an obligation upon him is to impose what is beyond capacity. However, if he is coerced yet carries out the act himself, then he is accountable. So Ibn al-Laham has pointed out a difference, an important difference between 2 different types of coercion. You know, what if I carry you and throw you, you know, off the, like heights or the mountain or something, and you land on someone and kill them? You know, how responsible are you? Zero. The zero. What if I beat you so hard, torture you, and tell you, kill this person, you know, commit fornication, drink wine, destroy the property of that person? Ibn al-Laham is saying, you are still a choosing agent. You are still a choosing agent because you're committing the act yourself. You're not an instrument here. Although in the madhab they use this word instrument, which is ala. Are you like just an ala? Sometimes they use it for ikrah that is not mulji, and you have to pay attention to the context. They call any mukrah ala. But when they make a distinction by this word between al-ikrah al-mulji and al-ikrah ghayr al-mulji, which is the compelling ikrah and the non-compelling ikrah, you are ala if you have zero choice. You are just an instrument. If you have zero choice. And in this case, zero accountability. Zero in every regard. Zero accountability in every regard. Because, like, shouldn't we say, but what about your humanity? But the humanity didn't have anything to do. You were basically simply used as an instrument. It could have been basically a wood lug, not you, that he threw at that person, and it wouldn't have made any difference. So your humanity did not participate in this. You know, other people, yes, we say, you know, if you kill someone by mistake, your humanity did have to do with this. You weren't driving your car. I mean, human beings do this, not cows. So, but here, you're just simply an instrument. Zero accountability. Okay, and then certainly we have, you know, when they talk about adilla for this qaida, or, you know, adilla for this cause of takhfif, we have many. You know, من كفر بالله من بعد إيمانه إلا من أكره قلبه مطمئن بالإيمان ولكن من شرح بالكفر فعليهم غضب من الله وعذاب عظيم. من كفر بالله من بعد إيمانه, he who disbelieves in Allah after having faith, إلا من أكره وقلبه مطمئن بالإيمان, except for one who is coerced into disbelief, while his heart is at ease with faith. His heart is content, at ease with faith. Like faith is established in their heart, but they're just coerced. These are basically excused by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When they tortured Ammar to commit, you know, to other words of disbelief, and he came and complained to the Prophet ﷺ. He said to him, what? In adu fa'ud. If they return to it, you return to it as well. Return to, giving them what they ask for. But then, and certainly in Allah تجاوز لي عن أمتي الخطأ والنسيان وما استكرهوا عليه. Allah had pardoned my ummah for me for error, mistake, and what they are coerced to do or compelled to do. But what are the coercion types in the madhab? So coercion types in the madhab. First, justified. This is valid. This is called ikrah bihaq. Ikrah bihaq. Justified. This is valid and consequential. So if the judge brings you and forces you to divorce your wife, that's the judge, and forces you to divorce your wife, it's called court-enforced divorce, for instance. Is it valid? Yes. Consequential? Yes. Aren't you mukrah? Yes. But it is ikrah bihaq. It's justified ikrah. It is justified ikrah. If the judge brings you and forces you to pay off your gharim, debtor or creditor, is this ikrah? Yes. Consequential, legally valid and consequential. Yes, it's ikrah bihaq. It's justified ikrah. Justified ikrah is valid and consequential. So what about unjustified ikrah? That is bighayri haq. Unjustified ikrah bighayri haq. Okay. Now, this will be divided into two types. Mulji', compelling, غير ملجئ. Non-compelling. What about al-mulji'? Al-mulji' is what we talked about here. And they will mention examples of the mulji'. But what we talked about here, you're basically being used as an instrument. You're completely overpowered. It brings you to zero choice. And if there is zero choice, there is zero accountability. Zero choice, zero accountability. Mulji'. Non-compelling. Non-compelling, there is nuance here. There is like a discussion here. It's non-compelling. You're still a choosing agent. I beat you, I threatened you, but you did it yourself. You committed the act yourself. So we cannot say that you're not a choosing agent. You are a choosing agent. Will you be accountable? So Ibn al-Laham said, you're going to be accountable. But does that mean that you're going to be at fault all the time? No. This is what the discussion is about. When will you be at fault? If you basically listen to your coercer, is what we will discuss. So Imam Ibn Rajab rahimahullah said the second section, the ruling concerning the coerced person. It's two types. The first is one who has absolutely no choice, like one who's physically forced to enter, like you make an oath to not enter a particular place, and then you're physically forced into it. Zero choice, zero accountability. You have not breached your oath. Or a woman who's laid down and raped, for instance, such, things of that nature. No sin by consensus, and not deemed to have broken their oath according to the majority. And we will discuss, the woman who was forced into intercourse by her husband, for instance, during Hajj or fasting. This will be a discussion later on. The second type, one who is coerced through beating or other means until he commits the act themselves. So legal accountability remains, he says, and he says that he is still a choosing agent, but he says that his motive was not the act itself. His motive is to avoid harm. So in a way he's choosing, and in a way he's not choosing, and that is what complicates the issue and makes it subject to discussion. So he says there is a consensus. This is a consensus, that he would not be allowed to kill someone else. Because what is the most that I can do to you? I'm threatening you. what is the most I can do to you? To kill you. Okay, so that will not justify you going on to kill someone else, because تكون فديت نفسك بأخيك. You will have basically spared your life by sacrificing your brother. You can't do that. You cannot do that. So by consensus, that is not, ikrah is not applicable here. Ikrah is not applicable here, which tells you, like, many times we like in our countries, in our environment, people actually do this and think that they are mukrah. People could do this and they think that they are mukrah. People can kill and innocent people, and they think that they are under coercion. Doesn't apply. No scholar ever would allow for this. There is no room here. What if you're going to destroy someone's property? Imam Ibn Rajab says destroying someone's property. Like, I force you into burning someone's house. Not killing them, but destroying their property, destroying their crops, burning their crops, etc. What if that's the case? So in the madhab, so we have three different positions. We have the authorized position in the madhab. You're permitted to do that. You're allowed to do that, to destroy someone's property. And then you go back and demand compensation. When the owner demands compensation from you, you go back and demand compensation from the coercer. The second position is you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that. And both of you are liable, just like the case of killing. When someone forces you to kill someone else and you go ahead and kill them, both of you are liable in our madhab. Both retribution or qisas will apply to both of you. In our madhab. Okay? What if you destroy someone's property? It's different. Only the coercer, according to their authorized position in the madhab, will be liable. And the owner can demand the compensation from you. And then you, in turn, demand it from the coercer. But ultimately, the coercer is liable. Second position is you're both liable. Third position is only you are liable. And Ibn Rajab here says that this is weak. That is why he said there are two opinions, and then he mentioned three, because as if he said, I'm not even counting the third one, because it's so weak. He said there are two opinions, and then he mentioned three. The three are the coercer is liable and you're not at fault. That's the madhab. The second, you're both liable because you were not permitted to do that. The third, only you are liable. And why? Because you are al-mubashir. You are the mubashir. You are the actual doer. He is al-mutasabbib. He is the one who caused you to do it, but you are the mubashir, you're the actual doer. But that position is very weak, so we discard that position. Now, what if they ask you to drink wine or to commit some other ma'asiyah? They ask you to drink wine or commit some other ma'asiyah. So we're done with killing, okay? We're not talking about killing anymore. Killing is not allowed at all. Yes? The same applies to them. The same applies to them. Same applies to them. You're not allowed to kill. So now, ma'asiyah, disobedience, like drinking wine, for instance, and things of that nature. What would be the ruling here? They disagree. So the vast majority permit you to drink wine and to commit whatever other ma'asi. And some of the scholars, and this is one report within the Hanbali madhab, and it is the position of Sahnun, the position of some of the Sahaba, like al-Dhahak and Ibn Abbas, they don't permit this. So permit, no. This is A, and this is A. Capital A, small a, if you remember from Umdat al-Fiqh. Okay. What about the people who permit here disobedience, and we will tell them he was actually forced into fornication. What are you going to do? They disagree. So Shafi'i said that's still coercion. That's a valid coercion. And that is a small a position in our madhab. But our madhab, they disagreed among themselves, and they have three different positions. It is valid coercion, it is not valid coercion, and the third, which is the madhab, meaning for the later generations, it became the madhab. It is valid, it is not valid if there was erection. Because in this case, like, you know, we're not going to believe you. Like, we're not going to believe that it was pure coercion. Because if it was pure coercion, this would not have happened. This would not have happened. Not permitted. The majority of the scholars will say not permitted. There is a nuanced position, you know, I think it is in the Maliki position, that you will have to factor in something else, which actually makes, you know, a lot of sense. It's a very logical position with it from the Maliki madhab. Is she consenting or not? If she's not consenting, it's not permitted by certainly not permitted. So, because this is not fornication, this is rape. If she's not consenting, then it is not permitted, you know, for certain. And if she's consenting, then it's permitted if it is valid coercion. But Malikis also are very tough with valid coercion. Valid coercion for Malikis is the threat of death. They don't consider a lot of, you know, what we consider to be coercion. They don't consider it coercion. Okay. So, so those who say it is not permitted, they will say that taqiyya only applies to speech, not to actions. Speech, not actions. That you're permitted when it comes, you know, to speech, not action. But when it comes to action, actual disobedience, like by action, there is no room. Taqiyya only applies to, taqiyya is the concealment of faith, basically out of fear from something or somebody. Okay, Ibn al-Laham says, and then when we talk about speech, we're talking about all contracts, we're talking about all oaths, anything that you utter by your mouth, you know, coercion applies here. So even the word of disbelief, coercion applies here. But like I said, for the Malikis, they consider valid coercion to be the threat of death. We don't. We consider a lot more, which we will discuss shortly, inshallah. We don't in the sense that we don't limit it to that. We expand more than that. As for coercion in speech, the scholars are in agreement about its validity, general agreement about its validity. We're not talking about prerequisites to call it valid coercion, but in terms of, you know, speech, there is general agreement that coercion applies to speech, because what the Prophet said to Ammar, "In adu fa'ud," if they return, then you return as well. Ibn al-Laham says this maxim yields different rulings. The guiding principle is that coercion does not render actions permissible, rather it only permits speech. Though there is disagreement regarding some actions. Actually, his phrasing is needs a little bit of adjusting, because in the madhab there are so many actions that you are permitted to do under coercion. So to make the default that it does not render action permissible is not in line with the madhab. We said in the madhab, if you're forced into a disobedience, then the madhab is that you're permitted. We excluded from this fornication. But the madhab in other forms of this, in other types of disobedience, the madhab is that it is permitted. Yet, not everything is permitted, because killing is not permitted, fornication is not permitted. Therefore, we should say speech, okay. If you have a valid coercion according to the madhab, which we will discuss now, if you're coerced according to the madhab, which we will discuss now, anything they tell you to say, you can say. Action is divided into two groups. Killing and fornication, no. Other types of action, destroying someone's property, drinking wine, this, that, permitted if the coercion is valid. Now, so let us now discuss, what would be a valid coercion? What is a valid coercion? So Ibn al-Ham says, the Imam Ibn al-Ham rahimahullah says, that there is difference from Ahmad, difference in the reports that come from Ahmad. A narration by the group said that it is constituted by beating, imprisonment, or the taking of wealth. A narration by the group said beating, imprisonment, or the taking of wealth. Do you remember the group? The group is not al-Bukhari, Muslim, and Nasa'i. No, the group is the group of Ahmad's disciples. Do you remember them? We said that it is not a specific number and they are not specific people, because sometimes they mention the group, and meant different things. But the people to whom this applies, in most of the Hanbali discourse, are 8 people. 6 of them are almost always there. That is 3 relatives, 2 sons, Abdullah and Saleh, Hanbal, his cousin, 3 relatives, and the 3 others who are not. This would be Abu Talib al-Mushkani, Abd al-Malik al-Maymuni, and the 3rd is Ibrahim al-Harbi. The 2, that they sometimes choose one of them versus the other would be Harb al-Kirmani and Abu Bakr al-Marruzi. Despite the fact that Abu Bakr al-Marruzi is so important in the madhab, just so important in the sanad of the madhab. But that's what it is. So now, when they say it's reported by the group, what do they mean to say? It doesn't have to be necessarily all 7 of them. They're just meaning a lot of people reported this from Ahmad. A lot of Ahmad's disciples reported it from him. So it's not just a solitary report from Ahmad. This is really established. Another narration, threatening with those things also counts. Explicitly in the narration of Ibn Mansur, he said, the threshold of coercion is when one fears being killed or severely beaten. So it is basically a threat, So they're not beating you right now, they're threatening. So threatening, and that's the position chosen by Imam Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. He believes that Ghalabat al-Dhann here counts, predominant assumption. We work on predominant assumption all the time. So he says if a person strongly believes that he will be harmed, whether in his person, his family, or his property, then he is considered coerced. And that is basically the widest and, I believe, the best definition. if a person strongly believes, remember this, if a person strongly believes that he will be harmed, whether in his person, his family, or his property, then he is considered coerced. Does that mean it will be valid for him to do anything? No, we said that he will not be allowed to kill, he will not be allowed to fornicate, but, and then we will come to, to a regulator for this soon, inshallah. As for verbal abuse and insults, so then we agreed, if there will be harm to yourself, to your family, to your property, you are coerced. Physical harm, what if it is insults, verbal abuse, insults? Is that coercion? And, you know, at the end of the day, it's not going to be like real coercion, but the very fact that there was a discussion in the madhab about this is telling of the, what? Maqsad min maqasid al-Sharia, protecting honor, protecting people's honor. Like the Sharia really basically is observant of honor. And this is something that you don't find in modern society, particularly in our Western context, you know. So as long as I didn't touch you, like I can say anything, you know, and I didn't touch you. Like the first person to touch is the person to be found at fault. But that is not in the Sharia. You know, I'm not gonna curse your mother, for instance, and then say, oh, I didn't touch you. Yeah. Blackmail basically is the threat, there is predominant assumption that the threat will come through. And if there is a predominant assumption that the threat can be executed, that you can actually carry out your threat and cause me significant harm in my body, my property, and my family, then it is considered coercion. Okay, so this applies here. So al-Qadi, that's al-Qadi Abu Ya'la, said it is not coercion according to a single narration. He said riwayatan wahida. He said that it's just not coercion. It's not a matter of disagreement. Abu Muhammad in al-Mughni said these things don't constitute coercion. However, if they are directed at the person of dignity in a manner that humiliates him or her and causes public shame, it is like excessive beating in the case of others. It is like excessive beating in the case of others. Will it allow for them to fornicate and kill? Of course not. But it is like excessive beating for others. By threatening to torture his child, is that coercion? They disagreed. Some said no. The majority, and that's the madhab, said yes. You know, so if it is basically torture your child, then yes. The madhab actually goes beyond this, and says that it applies when the threat involves someone whose suffering causes the person great distress, such as a parent, wife, or friend. You know, they really value friendship a great deal here. So even if it is your friend that is being, the threat, they're threatening to torture not only your child, parent, or wife, your friend, then it is considered, you know, a person whose harm, suffering causes you great distress is considered coercion. Again, now Sheikh Shithri has like a very good principle, guiding principle. He is a contemporary Hanbali. He has a very good guiding principle. He said that the guiding principle should be to weigh between the harm threatened by the coercion and the act he's being coerced to perform. Weigh between them. And The guiding principle comes from another قاعدة. يدفع الضرر الأعلى باحتمال الضرر الأدنى. The greater harm is basically avoided by tolerating the lesser harm. The greater harm is avoided by tolerating the lesser harm. Tolerate the lesser harm. In this case, you like your brother, so you can't favor yourself over your brother. You will put your brother like as an equal to you. But of course, like you can't kill your brother to save yourself. So because if he's equal to you, then you should not basically go on to kill them to spare yourself. Because here, you're doing it yourself with your hand. In the other case, you're just like a passive participant, like you just surrender to your fate. So you weigh between them, and you avoid the greater harm by tolerating the lesser harm. Then there are other discussions about the legal, validity. What if someone is coerced to make wudu and they intend it and make it? Valid or not valid? You're coerced to make wudu. You're coerced any act of worship. You're coerced to pray, and then you go and pray. You intend it. It's valid. What if someone is coerced to have intercourse with a menstruating woman? So then expiation will be binding on you if you were choosing. Coercion lifts the choice here? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. You will have to expiate. What if someone is coerced? What if someone refuses to pay zakat and then they are coerced into paying it? So the madhab would say, that the intention of the ruler who took it by force accounts for yours, or replaces your intention, and it will be valid. However, Abu al-Khattab and Ibn Aqil said, valid outwardly, not inwardly. Valid outwardly meaning what? We will not come back and ask you for the zakat one more time. But inwardly, will you be basically clear in the sight of God? No. Okay. Then what if a fasting person is coerced into the nullifiers of fasting? Eating, drinking, intercourse. They separate, like we said before in this discussion, they separate intercourse from everything else. If you're coerced into any of the nullifiers other than intercourse, no problem. If you're coerced into intercourse, your fasting is invalid. Your fasting is invalid. What if someone observing i'tikaf is forced to, walk out of the masjid, walk out themselves of the masjid? Their i'tikaf is still valid. That coercion is will excuse them. Their i'tikaf is still valid. So the issue of intercourse in particular is basically a complicated issue. So what if a woman is coerced by her husband into intercourse during Ramadan fasting or during the Hajj before the first release from Ihram? What happens, to her? So there are different positions. Imam Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah, as usual, will take the position that she didn't do anything. She's not at fault. She's not liable. She didn't do anything to make her at fault. Therefore, he will not invalidate her Hajj and stuff like that. Or Siyam or anything. She just didn't do anything. She was forced. But the madhab, let me tell you what the madhab is, and then tell you the disagreements among the madhab. The madhab is her Hajj and her fasting are invalidated. Her Hajj and her she was coerced by her husband. Her Hajj and her fasting are invalidated. And then, is she responsible for kafara for fasting? No. Is she responsible for Hajj? No. But she has to come back and repeat the Hajj next year. Yet, her husband is the one who is responsible to pay for the expenses. That's the madhab. Try to remember it. Now, the disagreements. The disagreements are her Hajj and fasting are valid. Her Hajj and fasting are not valid. Her fasting is not valid, but her Hajj is valid. And that is, you know, they may have factor in, you know, the difficulty of invalidating her Hajj, you know, and then fasting, she just needs to make up one day of fasting. That's easy, just let her make it. Anyway, but that is the discussion. So in Madhab, Hajj and fasting are both valid. She's not required, she's not going to be liable for any expiation or anything, but you'll have to make up both the day of fasting and come back and do the Hajj. And the expenses of her next Hajj will be binding on the coercer, her husband, who coerced her. But as we said, and Imam Taqiyuddin said what? All clear. She's all clear. She's all clear. Then finally, I guess let's try to conclude here. And I wanted to say that all contracts will be invalid because it's part of speech. Contracts are like speech, even though you sign but they're like speech. All contracts will be invalid. Conclusion, you know, the beginning of this conclusion is from Ibn Rajab, and I'll read it from Ibn Rajab, rahimahullah, the Imam, al-Kabir. Forms of speech are conceivable under coercion. So if a person is unjustly coerced into making a statement, no legal consequence results from that statement. It is null and void. This is because the coerced person's words issued from him unwillingly, so he is pardoned and is not held accountable for them in either this life or the next. In this way, the coerced person differs from the forgetful or ignorant one. This applies equally to contracts, such as sales and marriage, as well as to dissolutions, such as khul', divorce, and manumission, and also to oaths and vows. This is the opinion of the majority of scholars. So, after this, that the utterance of the word of disbelief is counted within this. This is part of speech. It is excused. Kalimat al-kufr is excused as well. So, one guiding principle is to say that things that are allowed in necessity, but halat tarar, are allowed in ikrah, coercion. You know, acts that would be permitted for necessity would be allowed. Acts that would not be permitted for necessity will not be allowed. Killing and fornication are not allowed for necessity. They are not allowed in the case of ikrah. There is one thing that I just wanted to point out, because sometimes, like, I've seen people, like authors, confuse this. They think that in the Hanbali madhab, marriage would be valid even within the context of coercion. Marriage would be valid in the context of coercion. This is Hanafi, not Hanbali. Hanbali is like the Maliki and Shafi'i. What may be confusing in the Hanbali madhab is that zawaj al-talji'a is valid. Zawaj al-talji'a or nikah al-talji'a. Al-talji'a. And al-talji'a, if you translate al-talji'a, it will be what? People may think that it's coercion. Talji'a is basically marriage of necessity. Marriage, not coercion, necessity. Like when you marry a woman to basically save her from a proposal that she, by someone she hates. Like someone, like a wali, for instance, he's afraid that the ruler or like a tyrant or like a wicked person will propose to her, will ask for her hand in marriage, and then they like pretend that she got married. They bring in the ma'zun and everything, and they pretended that she got married to someone else without intending marriage. The Hanbalis consider this marriage valid because you just can't do this with marriage. Do the Hanbalis consider bay' al-talji'a valid if you do this sale of necessity, according to the Hanbalis? Valid or not? Invalid. But they say that marriage is not like sale. Sale, there is room for hazl and there is room for stuff. Even the sale in jest, is not valid in the Hanbali madhab. Marriage in jest, valid, because you gotta be careful with this. You got to be careful with this. So if we want then to have like a diagram, we'll say coercion. So بحق, justified, بغير حق, not justified. ملجئ, compelling, غير ملجئ, not compelling. The disagreement is about this one. بغير حق, غير ملجئ. Then we will say we have speech, and if you want to put contracts separately, you may put contracts separately. Speech, contracts, and what? Acts of disobedience. Acts of disobedience. Speech, you're excused. Ikrah is valid, you're excused. Contracts, the contracts will be all invalid. All invalid. Under coercion. All invalid. Which means what? No liability. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. No liability. No liability. Acts, what are we talking about here? And then, as I said to you, the madhab will be detailed, and we've gone over the madhab, but a guiding principle that we can use is weigh the two matters and avoid the greater harm by tolerating the lesser harm. Your brother is just like you. Your life is not better than his or not more important than his, but then try to weigh matters and avoid the greater harm by tolerating the lesser harm. Is that utilitarian? No. It is quite anchored into deontological ethics, obligation ethics, because utilitarian, there would be no borders. We do not have this discussion to begin with. We do not have red lines. Because from your perspective, like I would save my life, like I would just like kill my brother and save my life, because it is, from my perspective, my life is more meaningful, to me. Anyway, so it's not utilitarian. At the same time, there is room for flexibility, human discernment, flexibility, and human discernment. قولوا قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك